Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
Ready to go deep on Peter Thiel's 0 to 1? Buckle up, because we're going to unpack some seriously contrarian views on startups and, building the future.
Yeah, Thiel, he definitely doesn't hold back, that's for sure. He's got some pretty strong opinions.
Oh, yeah.
About escaping competition, building monopolies, thinking about the future in a way that most people just don't.
Yeah, even just the title of the book, 0 to 1, it kind of hints at that different way of thinking.
Yeah.
It's not about incremental progress.
Right.
It's about making something totally new.
And that's, I think, one of the things that makes this book so fascinating. It challenges a lot of the assumptions we have about how the world works, especially when it comes to, innovation and entrepreneurship.
He kicks things off with this question that he's actually known for asking in job interviews. He says, what important truth do very few people agree with you on? I mean, talk about a conversation starter, right?
Yeah. It's a question that really goes to the core of his whole philosophy. It forces you to think for yourself, to challenge conventional wisdom, and to kind of identify those areas where your thinking goes against the mainstream.
Yeah, it's a lot tougher to answer than it sounds. We're all conditioned to accept certain truths, even if we haven't really examined them ourselves.
Yeah, and Thiel argues that it's exactly in those areas where we disagree with the majority that the most interesting opportunities are. Those are the places where you can find what he calls secrets, those important truths that other people just haven't figured out yet.
Okay, so then how do we find those secrets? Is it just a matter of being, contrarian?
It's more than that. Thiel says it requires a curious mind, a willingness to look for patterns where other people see only randomness, and the courage to actually pursue those insights, even when they lead you down a path that's not the well-trodden path.
It really sounds like he's putting a huge emphasis on the importance of thinking for yourself.
Absolutely. He believes that too many people are just content to follow the crowd, to accept the status quo, and to miss out on those opportunities that are hidden in plain sight.
He actually brings up the whole .com bubble as an example to show how conventional thinking can really lead us astray.
He was right there in the thick of it with PayPal during that time.
Yeah.
And he makes the case that although the .com crash was definitely a painful experience, it actually taught us some of the wrong lessons.
Okay, so what were those wrong lessons, and why does he think they're still holding us back today?
So the prevailing wisdom after the .com bust was that startups should focus on incremental improvements, stay lean, compete hard, and prioritize product over distribution. Sounds pretty reasonable, right?
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty standard business school kind of principles. So what's his beef with that?
He argues that they encourage this mindset that's very timid, very unambitious, that ultimately limits the possibility for really groundbreaking innovation. He believes that if we actually want to build the future, we need to be thinking much bigger, bolder, and much more long-term.
And that leads us to probably one of his most controversial ideas, that monopolies aren't always a bad thing, and actually they can be a sign of a successful business.
This goes against everything we're taught about economics, right? Competition is good, monopolies are bad. But Thiel flips that script.
He says that every truly successful company actually creates a kind of monopoly by solving a unique problem in a way that no one else can.
Google, for example, they dominate the search market, right?
Yeah.
But they got there by providing a service that's way better than anything else out there, way better than anything that came before. And that dominance actually allows them to invest in research and development. They can attract top talent and ultimately continue to innovate at a scale that smaller companies just can't compete with.
So he's not talking about those old school monopolies, the ones that kind of stifled innovation and, gouged consumers.
Exactly. He makes a distinction between creative monopolies and destructive monopolies. Creative monopolies actually create value. They solve problems in new and innovative ways. But destructive monopolies, they just extract value from the market without offering anything new.
So how do you tell the difference? How can we tell if a company is building a creative monopoly versus a destructive one?
Thiel argues that it really boils down to whether the company is actually creating something new and valuable for the world. Are they solving a problem that's just been lingering? Are they making people's lives better in a, substantial way? If the answer is yes, then it's probably a creative monopoly, even if they happen to dominate their specific market.
This is a pretty radical way to think about business, I have to say. I'm really interested to hear more about how we should be approaching entrepreneurship if we want to build those creative monopolies.
Well, one of the key concepts that he talks about is this idea of last mover advantage.
Last mover advantage. Isn't the whole idea to be the first to market? Like a first mover advantage?
That's the conventional wisdom, but Thiel actually argues that it's often more advantageous to be the last mover, especially in a significant market.
I'm going to need you to explain that one.
It comes down to the difference between long-term value and short-term gains. A lot of companies get caught up in trying to be first, all the hype of being first to market, but they often end up failing to build a sustainable business, a business that can actually last.
Like those .com companies that flamed out so quickly back in the day.
Exactly. They were so focused on grabbing market share as fast as possible that they didn't really build any lasting advantages.
So what's the alternative? How do you build a company that's actually built to last?
Thiel says it starts with choosing the right market, the right space. Don't just chase the hottest trends. Look for those areas where there's a real need that's not being met and where you can actually build a strong position that other people can't easily take away from you.
Sounds like he's advocating for a more patient and strategic
For sure. He's not about quick flips or chasing the next shiny object. It's about building companies that are designed to actually create value for decades, not just for a few years.
This all kind of relates back to his idea of definite optimism, doesn't it?
Right.
The future is something that we make, not something that just happens to us.
Right. It's about moving beyond that sort of indefinite optimism that we see all around us these days, where we just assume things are going to get better, even if we don't have a clear idea of how it's actually going to happen.
So instead of hedging our bets and just hoping for the best, he's saying we need to identify our specific goals and then just go for it.
Exactly. He believes that that kind of definite optimism is absolutely essential for building a better future. It's not just about being hopeful, it's about having a clear vision and then having the grit to actually make it real.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together, building a monopoly, focusing on that long-term value, being the last mover in a market. It's all about going against the grain and then making bold bets on the future you want to create.
You're getting it. And that's what I find so engaging about this book. It challenges us to really rethink our assumptions, how the world works, and then adopt a much more ambitious and intentional approach to creating the future.
But how do we even begin to find those opportunities, those secrets that can lead to these groundbreaking companies? Is there like a formula?
This is where Thiel really gets interesting. He says that secrets are often hidden in plain sight. We just need to learn how to see them.
What does he mean by that?
He uses the term the power law to describe this phenomenon that actually applies to so many areas of life, from how wealth is distributed to the success of startups. Essentially, it means a very small number of outcomes actually account for the majority of results.
So we have to learn to identify those few things that have the potential for those outsized returns and then go all in.
That's a good way to put it. Look for those areas where you can create a huge impact and then don't spread your efforts too thin.
It's about being able to identify those areas where the potential reward really outweighs the risk and then being brave enough to make those bold bets, to seize those opportunities.
He wants us to think about the future as full of possibilities, not just probabilities.
And to really grasp the idea that we can actually create the future we want rather than just waiting to see what happens.
It all goes back to that whole definite optimism idea. He believes that we need to have a crystal clear vision of the future we want to build and the courage to go after it, even if it means doing things differently than everyone else.
And that's where the magic happens, right? When you question things, when you're not afraid to explore those uncharted territories, the places where other people are hesitant to go.
Exactly, you're going to find the secrets. That's where you can build those creative monopolies that can actually change the world.
This is honestly making me think about my own life and work in a totally different light. I'm starting to feel inspired to go out there and start searching for those secrets, the opportunities that I might be overlooking.
That's the power of Thiel's thinking. It's challenging, it's thought-provoking, but ultimately incredibly empowering. He gives us a framework for thinking about the future and then building something truly new and valuable for the world.
Okay, so you found a secret, you've uncovered it. What do you do with it? Do you shout it from the rooftops? Or do you keep it under wraps?
That's a great question. And Thiel tackles it directly in the book. He believes that some secrets are best kept quiet, at least initially.
So being a little mysterious can actually be a good thing.
It can, especially when you're trying to build something new, trying to gain an advantage. You don't want to give your secrets away too early or someone else will copy you before you can actually establish yourself.
He also emphasizes choosing the right team when you're building a company, right? He uses that analogy, founding matrimony, which is pretty powerful.
He argues that choosing a co-founder is probably one of the most important decisions you'll make, and it should be treated with the same level of care and consideration as choosing a life partner.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
Good.
But it makes sense when you consider all the time and energy you're going to invest in building something with someone. You got to trust them completely, you got to share their vision, and you have to be able to work together even when things get tough, which they always do with a startup.
You know, he actually uses the analogy of a mafia to describe the ideal startup team. Of course, not in a literal sense,
Right.
but in terms of the loyalty, the dedication, the shared purpose that you really need to create a successful organization. You know, they're not just colleagues, they're more like a band of brothers, a tight-knit group that's willing to do whatever it takes to achieve their mission.
So it's not just about finding talented people, it's about finding people who believe in what you're doing and are willing to, give it their all.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that this culture, this feeling, it can't be faked. It comes from the people you choose, the values you live by, and how you treat one another.
He also cautions against getting caught up in what he calls the perk war that's so common in Silicon Valley. All the free lunches and ping pong tables and stuff.
All those superficial benefits might attract people for a while, but they don't build a lasting culture.
So what does?
Thiel believes the best perks come from the work itself. Having a chance to work on something meaningful, making a real difference, and being part of a team that feels like family.
It's about building a company where people feel valued and respected and empowered to do their best work.
And where they have ownership and responsibility, they're not just treated like cogs in a machine, they're actually contributing.
Yeah, it's about creating an environment where people feel like they're part of building something bigger than themselves, something that they're truly passionate about.
And that brings us to another crucial piece of the puzzle, distribution. It's not enough to just build a great product. You have to actually get it into the hands of customers.
He says that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially tech people, they overlook that part. They get so wrapped up in the product itself that they forget about actually getting it out there.
It's one of those things that seems so obvious in hindsight, but it often trips up startups. You can have the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it or can't easily get it, it doesn't matter.
Thiel argues that distribution is often what separates the successful companies from the ones that fail. And he goes through different types of distribution, from complex sales to viral marketing, and explains how to choose the right approach for your specific business.
And he also makes it clear that distribution isn't just something you tack on at the end. It has to be baked into your strategy from the very beginning.
This is all so insightful. And I think it's safe to say that his thoughts on building monopolies, thinking about the future and figuring out distribution, are all incredibly relevant to anybody who wants to build a successful company. But what about the bigger picture? How do his ideas apply to, the challenges and opportunities we're facing today in the 21st century?
That's a great question. And this is where Thiel's ideas about the relationship between humans and machines become really interesting. He devotes a whole chapter to this, exploring how computers are changing the world and how we can actually leverage technology to build a better future.
So is he talking about AI, robots taking over?
Yeah.
Because that seems to be on everyone's mind these days.
He touches on those ideas for sure, but his main focus is how computers can be used to actually help people and empower them, not replace them. He makes the case that the most valuable businesses of the future are going to be built by entrepreneurs who are trying to empower people, not make them obsolete.
So it's not humans against machines, it's humans and machines working together.
Exactly. He believes the real potential lies in finding those ways for humans and computers to kind of complement each other's strengths.
And what are those strengths?
Humans are good at things like creativity, judgment, complex decision-making, things that require that human touch. Computers, on the other hand, are great at tasks that involve processing a lot of data, finding patterns, doing repetitive tasks quickly and accurately.
So it's about finding the right balance, the right way to divide the work between humans and computers.
You got it. And Thiel believes that this collaboration, this partnership, can lead to breakthroughs in every area, from science and tech to business to art, really.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. He actually uses his experience at PayPal to illustrate this. Remember how they were losing millions of dollars to credit card fraud back in the day?
Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was a huge issue for them.
They tackled it by creating the system that used computers, of course, but also human analysts.
So the computers would be like, hey, this looks kind of fishy, and then the humans would make the final call.
That's right. And it ended up being super effective. They were able to drastically reduce fraud and actually started making their first profits.
That's a perfect example of how blending human intelligence and machine power can lead to a breakthrough.
And it's an approach that Thiel has used with other ventures, like Palantir, the data analysis company that he co-founded.
I've heard of Palantir. They're kind of secretive, right?
Yeah, they are, which kind of adds to the mystery. But their software actually uses the same idea, that human coder hybrid model that they developed at PayPal.
So instead of trying to replace human analysts, it makes them even better.
Exactly. And it's being used for all sorts of things, from counterterrorism to fraud detection to tracking disease outbreaks. Pretty important stuff.
Incredible. So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from Thiel's experience and his insights about how technology is impacting the future of work and business?
The key takeaway, I think, is that we shouldn't be afraid of intelligent machines. Instead, we should be excited about the possibilities, about humans and computers working together to solve the problems that we couldn't solve on our own.
It's a much more positive outlook than you usually hear these days,
Yeah.
right? When everybody's worried about robots and AI.
Thiel is an optimist, but he's also realistic. He knows there are going to be some challenges along the way, but he fundamentally believes that tech can be a force for good in the world.
And that the entrepreneurs and the innovators who are going to shape the future are going to be the ones who can figure out how to empower people, not replace them.
Exactly. And that leads to a very interesting case study that he examines in the book, The Rise and Fall of the Clean Tech Industry.
Clean tech. Oh, yeah. Remember when everyone was convinced that was going to be the next big thing?
It was supposed to solve everything, climate change, energy independence, all these big problems.
And billions were invested in all these clean tech startups.
Yeah.
And then it all just kind of faded away.
It did. And Thiel's analysis of why so many of those clean tech companies failed is really fascinating.
I'm listening.
He starts by asking these 7 key questions he thinks every successful business needs to answer.
Okay, and what are those?
So, the first 3 are the engineering question. Can you create a truly groundbreaking technology, not just something slightly better? The timing question. Is right now the right time to be starting this particular business? And the monopoly question. Are you starting with a big piece of a small market, or are you just jumping into a huge market where you're going to get lost?
Okay, those sound familiar. We talked about those earlier. What are the other 4?
The people question. Do you have the right team in place? The distribution question. Do you have a way to not only make your product, but actually get it to the people who need it? The durability question. Will your position in the market still be strong 10, 20 years down the road? And lastly, the secret question. Have you actually found an opportunity that other people just aren't seeing?
Those are some really tough questions, huh? And Thiel's argument is that a lot of those clean tech companies just didn't answer them very well.
Right. They often overestimated what their technology could actually do. They underestimated how hard it is to get a product into the market. And they didn't build companies that could survive when competition got tough.
He talks about Solyndra as an example, right? That solar panel company that got all that government money and then went bankrupt.
Yeah, a classic example of a company that had a good idea but just couldn't get the execution right.
And then he compares that to the success of Tesla, which seems like they got a lot of things right.
Tesla's an interesting one. They definitely got a boost from all the hype around clean tech, but they've been very smart about their approach.
In what way?
They focused on building really groundbreaking tech. They started with a small, focused market, and then they grew from there. They also have a really strong leader in Elon Musk.
And they created a brand that people associate with cool tech and being green.
Absolutely. Tesla is a rare example of a clean tech company that's managed to build a real profitable business, one that seems built to last.
So is the lesson that clean tech is a bad idea?
No, not at all. He thinks there's still a huge amount of potential in the energy sector, but he warns against blindly following the hype, getting caught up in the excitement without doing your homework.
So it's not enough to have good intentions in a big market. You also need a smart business plan and a deep understanding of how everything works.
Exactly. He argues that the clean tech bubble was a good reminder that asking the right questions and avoiding the common mistakes is just as important as having a great idea.
This has been incredibly insightful so far, I gotta say. We've covered a lot of ground, from contrarian thinking to building monopolies to the ins and outs of distribution and the role of technology. But before we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive, I want to explore one more fascinating aspect of Thiel's book. His thoughts on something he calls the founder's paradox.
Ah, yes, the founder's paradox. One of the most thought-provoking parts of the book, for sure.
And something that I think anyone who's ever thought about starting a company or even just leading a team can relate to on some level.
Absolutely. He delves into the unique and often kind of contradictory traits of those founders who become really successful. You know, people like himself, Richard Branson, Sean Parker.
And he argues that these people, they're often both insiders and outsiders, rebels and conformists, geniuses and, well, maybe a little bit eccentric, you know.
Right. He points out that they often have really strong personalities, which can be a strength and a weakness depending on the situation.
And he isn't afraid to look at the downsides, like the whole idea of the founder as scapegoat.
It's an intriguing idea, for sure. He compares it to these ancient rituals and even modern celebrity culture, arguing that founders are often both praised and blamed, sometimes at the same time.
And he compares the fall of Bill Gates to the comeback of Steve Jobs at Apple, showing how important a founder's vision and leadership can be.
It reminds us that building a great company is about more than just a good idea. It's about having the right person leading the charge.
Someone who can inspire and motivate people and ultimately guide the company to reach its full potential.
Exactly. And that's why he believes the founder's paradox is something that everyone who wants to be an entrepreneur needs to grapple with. They need to understand the challenges, but also the opportunities that come with being the founder and develop the resilience and self-awareness to handle those things.
This is a good place to pause our deep dive for today, but we'll be back for part 2, where we'll keep exploring Thiel's ideas on escaping competition, building monopolies, and thinking about the future in a way that, as we've been saying, most people just don't.
So we were talking about the founder's paradox, those kind of out there personalities who can be brilliant, but also tough to deal with.
Yeah, those big personalities that can be amazing, but also, a handful sometimes.
Thiel really digs into what makes them tick, but I thought it was interesting how he brings it back to this idea of secrets, those hidden truths we were talking about earlier.
Okay, I'm curious. How does the founder's personality connect to finding secrets?
Well, Thiel's point is that founders, by their very nature, they just see the world differently. They're the ones who question everything, challenge those assumptions, and see possibilities where everyone else just sees, like, a brick wall.
So their unique way of seeing things helps them uncover those secrets that everyone else misses.
Exactly. Think about someone like Steve Jobs, right? He had this almost uncanny ability to know what people wanted before they even knew it themselves. That's a secret. A deep understanding of what people desire and how tech can, fulfill those desires.
But just knowing a secret isn't enough, is it? You got to know what to do with it.
Absolutely. And Thiel spends a lot of time talking about building those strong foundations for your company, especially in the beginning.
He uses that analogy of founding matrimony, right? Picking a co-founder is like picking a spouse.
It's a clever analogy, but it's more than that. He's highlighting how important it is to find the right person to build a company with. Someone who shares your vision, who has those skills you don't, and someone you can truly, truly trust.
He even uses the word mafia to describe the perfect startup team. I remember thinking, whoa, isn't that a little intense?
Yeah.
But then I got what he was saying.
It's about that level of loyalty, that shared sense of purpose, the commitment that holds a successful team together. They're not just coworkers, they're more like a band of brothers, people who are willing to go all out for each other and for the mission.
He argues that you can't fake that kind of culture. It has to come from the people you hire, the values you believe in, and how you treat everyone.
He warns against getting caught up in what he calls the perk war that happens in Silicon Valley. All those free lunches and ping pong tables and stuff.
Yeah, all those little perks that sound cool, but don't really build a strong, long-lasting culture.
The best perks, he says, come from the work itself. The chance to work on something that matters, to make a difference, and to be part of a team that feels like family.
It's about making a company where people feel appreciated, where they feel like they have a voice, and where they're encouraged to do their absolute best.
And where they have real ownership and responsibility, not just following orders, but actually making decisions.
It makes sense. You want people to feel like they're building something together, something they really care about.
And that leads to another super important piece: distribution. You can't just make a great product, you have to get it to the people who want it.
He says that's something a lot of entrepreneurs, especially those with a tech background, tend to miss. They get so focused on the tech itself that they forget about actually getting it to customers.
It's one of those things that seems obvious after the fact, but it can really trip up companies. You can have the most amazing product, but if no one knows about it or can't get it easily, what's the point?
Thiel says that distribution, that's often what separates the winners from the losers, the companies that succeed and the ones that don't. He goes through the different types of distribution, everything from complex sales to viral marketing, and he explains how to figure out the best approach for your business.
And he's really clear that distribution isn't just an afterthought. It needs to be part of your strategy from day one.
This is all really valuable, and I think it's fair to say that his ideas on building monopolies, thinking about the future, and nailing distribution are super relevant to anyone who wants to build a successful company. But what about the bigger picture? How do these ideas apply to, the world today with all the challenges and opportunities we're facing in the 21st century?
That's a great point. And that's where Thiel's ideas about how humans and machines interact become really relevant. He spends a whole chapter on this, exploring how computers are transforming the world and how we can actually use technology to build a better future.
Is he talking about AI, like the robots taking over our jobs thing that everyone's talking about?
He touches on that, but his focus is on how computers can be used to help and empower people, not replace them. He says the most valuable companies of the future are going to be built by entrepreneurs who focus on empowering people, not making them obsolete.
So it's not humans versus machines. It's more like humans and machines working together.
Exactly. He thinks the real opportunity is figuring out how to combine human creativity and judgment with the power and efficiency of computers.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. He uses his own experience at PayPal to illustrate this. Remember how they were losing millions to credit card fraud?
Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was a big deal for them.
They solved it by building a system that used computers, of course, but also had human analysts involved.
So the computers would flag things that looked suspicious, and then a person would make the final call.
That's it. And it was a huge success. They were able to cut down on fraud significantly and actually started turning a profit.
That's a perfect example of how blending human smarts and computer power can lead to a real breakthrough.
And Thiel has used this approach with other companies too, like Palantir, the data analysis company he co-founded.
I've heard of them. They're kind of mysterious, right?
They are, which makes them kind of intriguing. But their software uses that same idea, that human-computer partnership that they developed at PayPal.
So instead of trying to replace human analysts, it actually helps them do their jobs better.
Yeah, exactly. And they're using it for all sorts of things, like fighting terrorism, catching fraud, even tracking outbreaks of diseases.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So what's the main takeaway here? What can we learn from Thiel's experience and his ideas about how technology is changing the way we work and do business?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we shouldn't be afraid of smart machines. We should be thinking about how we can use them to do things we never could before, how they can help us solve problems that seemed impossible.
It's a more hopeful way of looking at things than just worrying about robots taking over, right?
Thiel's definitely an optimist, but he's also a realist. He knows there are going to be challenges, but he believes that technology can be a positive force.
That the people who are going to shape the future are going to be those who can figure out how to use technology to empower people, not just replace them.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really interesting case study he looks at in the book, the rise and fall of the clean tech industry.
Clean tech? Yeah. Remember back when everyone thought it was going to be the next big thing?
Yeah, it was supposed to be the answer to everything. Climate change, energy independence, all these big global issues.
People poured billions into those clean tech companies.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of fizzled.
And Thiel uses this as a warning, a reminder to ask the right questions and avoid those common mistakes that can trip up even the most promising companies.
What were some of those key questions that the clean tech companies missed?
He lays out 7 questions he thinks every startup needs to honestly ask themselves, and these apply to any industry, not just clean tech.
Okay, let's hear them.
So first up is the engineering question. Can you actually build something truly groundbreaking, not just a slightly improved version of what's already out there?
So making something 10% better isn't good enough.
Not if you're aiming to really shake things up. Next, the timing question. Is now actually the right time to start this particular business?
I guess even if you have a great idea, the world might not be ready for it yet.
Right. And then the monopoly question. Are you starting out by controlling a big chunk of a small market? Or are you just getting lost in a huge market where you'll never stand out? It goes back to that idea of getting away from competition and really owning a specific niche.
Instead of trying to please everyone, you find a smaller group where you can excel and then grow from there.
Exactly. So we've got the engineering, the timing, and the monopoly questions down. What are the other four?
Yeah. What else is there?
The people question. Do you have the right team? This is critical because even a brilliant idea won't go anywhere without a talented and dedicated team to make it happen.
And it's not just about individual talent. It's about finding people who can work well together. Right?
Absolutely. Then there's the distribution question. Do you have a way to not only create your product, but actually get it into the hands of customers? This is where a lot of companies struggle.
Yeah, they underestimate how hard it is to actually get their product out into the world.
And then you have the durability question. Will you still be in a strong position 10, 20 years from now? Are you building a company that can stand the test of time?
It's about thinking ahead, planning for those future challenges.
And finally, the secret question. Have you found a unique opportunity that everyone else is missing?
The secret sauce, the thing that gives you a real advantage.
Exactly. And Thiel's point is that many clean tech companies just didn't have that secret. They were doing what everyone else was doing and just hoping for the best.
He uses Solyndra as an example, that solar panel company that went bust even after getting millions in government money.
They had a good idea, but they didn't really think about how fast the technology was changing or how tough it would be to compete.
And he compares that to Tesla, which seems to have done a lot of things right.
Tesla's an interesting case. They really focused on cutting-edge tech. They started small and then scaled up. And they've got a strong leader in Elon Musk.
And their brand really stands for something. It's about innovation and style and being environmentally conscious.
Tesla's one of those rare clean tech companies that's built a solid, profitable business that seems like it'll be around for a while.
So is the takeaway that everyone should be trying to copy Tesla?
No, not really. He's not saying there's a one-size-fits-all answer for building a successful company. It's about learning from what worked and what didn't work and figuring out what makes sense for your situation.
It's about really thinking about the challenges and coming up with a strategy that works for you.
And remembering that success isn't just about a good idea. You need a vision, a good team, a plan, and the willingness to stick with it.
And the guts to take some risks, to make those bold moves that can lead to something truly innovative.
And never forget, the future isn't set in stone. We build it ourselves.
Speaking of adapting, one of the biggest things entrepreneurs have to deal with is how fast technology is changing. What does Thiel think about how technology is impacting the future of work and business?
Well, a big chunk of 0 to 1 is about the relationship between humans and machines.
It's both fascinating and a little scary, right? All this talk about AI and robots.
Yeah, it is. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence, about how robots might take our jobs, how technology could become dangerous.
Does Thiel buy into that?
He knows there are potential risks, but he has a more nuanced, more optimistic view.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He says that computers aren't the enemy. They're tools. And the best businesses are going to be created by people who use tech to empower others, not replace them.
So it's not about humans against machines. It's about figuring out how they can work together.
Right. He thinks the real potential is in combining human creativity and decision-making with the power and speed of computers.
He uses PayPal as an example, right? How they used human analysts and computer algorithms to fight credit card fraud.
That's a perfect example. They used computers to analyze tons of data and flag suspicious transactions, but it was humans who made the final call.
That's a smart approach.
And it was super successful. They were able to cut down on fraud and start making money.
That shows how powerful it can be to combine human intelligence and computer power.
And Thiel has used the same idea with other companies, like Palantir, the data analysis company.
Palantir, the one that's kind of secretive.
Yeah, which just adds to their mystique, right? But their software is built on that same idea of humans and computers working together, that partnership they developed at PayPal.
So instead of trying to replace human analysts, it helps them do their jobs better.
Exactly. And they're using it for everything from fighting terrorism to preventing fraud to tracking disease outbreaks.
That's amazing. So what's the takeaway here? What does Thiel's experience tell us about technology and the future of work?
I think the main thing is that we shouldn't be afraid of smart machines. We should be looking at how we can use them to solve problems we never could before.
So instead of worrying about robots taking over, we should be thinking about how technology can make us more powerful.
Exactly. He's saying we should focus on those things that humans are really good at, like creativity and making judgments, and use technology to make us even better at those things.
That's a lot more hopeful than the doom and gloom scenarios you hear all the time.
And it reminds us that we get to decide how technology shapes our world. We can use it to create a world where humans and machines work together, or we can let it create a world where humans are pushed aside.
Thiel's take on the whole human-machine thing is really interesting. It makes you think differently about technology and what it could mean for the future.
And it circles back to one of his main themes, having a vision for the future and then having the guts to go after it.
He calls it definite optimism, right? The idea that we're not just passengers, we can actually steer the future.
Right. He contrasts it with what he calls indefinite optimism, that vague hope that things will just get better somehow without a real plan.
He says we have to be deliberate about the future we want. We need to have goals, make plans, and be willing to take risks to make it happen.
He believes that kind of definite optimism is what it takes to make the world better. It's not just about hoping. It's about having a vision and then doing what it takes to make it real.
It's about taking charge, not just waiting to see what happens.
And that's really what 0 to 1 is all about. It's a challenge to entrepreneurs, innovators, anyone who wants to make a real difference in the world.
It's a reminder that we have the power to create the future we want. But it all starts with asking the right questions, challenging those old assumptions, and being willing to think differently. We've been digging into Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 and his idea of definite optimism, that we can actually shape the future.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept. Instead of just hoping for the best, we can actually make choices and take actions that really influence how things turn out.
And that connects directly to his whole argument about building those truly innovative companies.
Yeah.
The ones that aren't afraid to push boundaries.
He's not a fan of incremental progress. He wants to see those creative monopolies that tackle big problems in new and exciting ways.
But as we've seen, building those kinds of companies is hard. Even in industries with a ton of potential, like clean tech, there have been a lot of stumbles along the way.
Thiel uses that clean tech bubble as a case study to show those common traps that can trip up even the most promising startups.
And he outlines those 7 key questions that every entrepreneur should be asking, no matter what industry they're in.
The engineering question, the timing question, the monopoly question, the people question, the distribution question, the durability question, and the secret question.
We've touched on most of these already, but it's worth revisiting them in this context, seeing how they played out in the clean tech world.
Definitely. So starting with the engineering question, can you create something truly groundbreaking? Not just a slightly better version of what already exists. A lot of clean tech companies struggled with this one. They overestimated their technology and underestimated the challenges of actually bringing it to market.
They thought that because the need for clean energy was so obvious, everyone would just jump on board with their solutions.
But it turned out that developing and deploying those clean energy technologies was way more complicated and expensive than they initially thought.
Which brings us to the timing question. Is this the right moment to launch this specific business? Some clean tech companies were just too early. The market wasn't ready, and the technology was too expensive.
And then there's the monopoly question. Are you starting with a big chunk of a small market? A lot of those companies jumped into these crowded markets where they were up against established players and tons of other startups.
Instead of finding a niche where they could really excel and build a solid advantage, they tried to compete head-on with companies that had way more resources.
And of course, there's the people question. Do you have the right team? This is essential in any industry, but it was especially crucial in clean tech, where the problems were so complex.
You needed a team with deep technical knowledge, a strong grasp of the energy market, and the ability to navigate all those regulations.
And you absolutely needed a leader with the vision and the determination to see the project through, even when things got tough, someone who wouldn't give up.
And then there's the distribution question, which we've talked about a lot. It's not enough to just build a great product. You have to have a way to get it to your customers.
And a lot of clean tech companies struggled with that. They didn't have good distribution strategies, and they often underestimated the costs and challenges of actually getting their products installed and working properly.
Then there's the durability question. Will your company still be in a strong position in 10, 20 years? Can it weather the changes that are bound to happen in any market, but especially in something like energy?
A lot of those companies were so focused on the immediate problems that they didn't really think about the long-term, what the landscape might look like down the road.
And finally, the secret question. Have you found the unique opportunity that no one else has spotted? In a crowded field like clean tech, you really had to stand out.
You needed that secret, that special insight or advantage that gave you an edge over everyone else.
And Thiel's point is that a lot of those clean tech companies didn't have that. They were doing what everyone else was doing, and they're hoping that would be enough.
He contrasts these failures with the success of Tesla, a company that seemed to get a lot of things right.
Tesla's often seen as the clean tech success story, but even their path hasn't been easy, right?
Definitely. They've faced all sorts of hurdles and setbacks over the years, but they've managed to overcome them and become one of the most valuable car companies in the world.
So what set Tesla apart? How did they answer those 7 questions better than their competition?
Well, let's start with the engineering question. Tesla didn't just slightly improve existing electric vehicle technology. They built something genuinely new and innovative.
Their cars aren't just good for the environment. They're high performance. They look great. They're fun to drive.
They completely changed what people thought an electric car could be.
And they were smart about their timing. They didn't try to launch a mass-market electric car when the tech was still super expensive and the infrastructure wasn't there yet.
They started with a niche market, those high-end sports cars, and then they gradually expanded as the technology got better and people became more open to electric vehicles.
They also built a really strong brand, one that represents innovation and performance and sustainability.
Yeah, they created this aura around their products, and people were willing to pay a premium for that Tesla experience.
They also had this clear vision of the future, and they were able to communicate that vision in a way that got investors and customers excited.
And they weren't afraid to take risks, to make those bold moves, even when other people doubted them.
Sounds like they really embodied that definite optimism that Thiel talks about.
They did, and they were able to turn their vision into reality in a way that most clean tech companies couldn't.
So is the lesson that everyone should try to be the next Tesla?
Not exactly. He's not saying there's only one way to build a successful company. He's saying that we can all learn from those who came before us, both the successes and the failures.
It's about taking those lessons and applying them to your own situation.
Right. He's encouraging us to really think about the challenges we face and then come up with strategies that make sense for us. And to always remember that success isn't just about having a brilliant idea. It's about having a clear vision, a great team, a solid plan, and the determination to make it all happen.
And to be willing to take those risks, to make those bold moves that can lead to real innovation.
And never forget, the future isn't something that's just handed to us. It's something we create.
That's a powerful idea. And as we wrap up this deep dive into 0 to 1, I want to leave you with this question. What are you going to create? What kind of future are you going to build?